Good morning. This video is a makeup for Thursday's class, which is off because of the parents' meeting. And in this video, we will have an introduction to the urinary system. And in order to understand the importance of the urinary system, which is one of the excretory organs in the body, the organs that are responsible for excretion, in the body, there should be a necessary introduction at the beginning that would help you understand the bigger picture and understand the relationship between different body systems in the human body. So I start by opening a screen, and in order to understand the concept of excretion and the importance of excretion in the human body and how excretion is related to the metabolism in the body. So first of all, we have to know what metabolism is. What metabolism is. Of course, this is an introduction, and it includes general concepts. But meanwhile, while we are passing through this introduction, we're going to understand several concepts that are on the slides, and therefore I find this introduction necessary to understand the urinary system perfectly. Metabolism includes all the biochemical reactions that occur in living cells. So again, metabolism includes all biochemical reactions in a living cell. All biochemical reactions in a living cell. And as we have said at the beginning of the year, that all our life is nothing but biochemical reactions, meaning that if you want to give an order to a motor, to a muscle, to a voluntary muscle to contract, this occurs through chemical reactions. If you want to reflect on a certain idea, this occurs in your brain cells through biochemical reactions. Even our feelings and our mood are generated by chemical reactions in the body. And when we talk about metabolism, we have to divide metabolism into two broad categories. So we have anabolism or anabolic reactions, anabolism or anabolic reactions, as well as catabolism or catabolic reactions. When we talk or when we mention anabolism, we mean building up of molecules or chemical reactions that build up molecules. Whereas when we mention catabolism, we are talking about breaking down or breakdown of molecules. So if you start by small molecules, like for example, amino acid molecules, and you join those amino acids through chemical bonds in order to give a polypeptide, which is a bigger molecule, then you are building up a polypeptide molecule, and this is anabolism. But on the other hand, if we have a glucose molecule, and then through the process of aerobic respiration, we divide that or we break down bonds in the glucose molecule in order to get, in order to produce energy. But meanwhile, as a side product of this process of breakdown, which we call cellular respiration, we obtain smaller molecules like carbon dioxide and water. Therefore, this is catabolism or a breakdown reaction. And that's why the process of building up a polypeptide chain out of several amino acids linked together is an anabolic process, whereas the process of breaking down glucose to get energy in the process of cellular respiration, which ends up by having carbon dioxide and water vapor as side products, this is a catabolic process. Now we will move on to a new concept, and in this new concept, we will understand the relationship between digestion, absorption, and excretion. As we mentioned in the digestive system before, the last step of digestion is the step that occurs or that is witnessed in the ileum, and in which we obtain the final soluble products of digestion. So if we start by carbohydrates, the final soluble, the simplest products of digestion are the monosaccharides, and on top of the monosaccharides, we have glucose, because glucose is the most abundantly present carbohydrate molecule, or more accurately, monosaccharide molecule in the human body. So monosaccharides are the final products of digestion of carbohydrates, and they are absorbed through the ileum, or through the mucosa of the ileum, in order to reach the blood. But we also have proteins, and the final product of protein digestion are the amino acids, and they are small, simple, soluble molecules. That's why they also pass to the blood. Whereas the final products of digestion of fats are the fatty acids mainly. And in addition to the fatty acids, we have a molecule called glycerol, and you always confuse this molecule with glycogen. There is a big difference between glycogen, which is the storage form of carbohydrates in animals, and glycerol, which is the final one of two final products of digestion of fats. These are the simple, soluble, small molecules that succeeded in passing through the ileum mucosa to reach the blood, and the purpose for them is to finally reach the body cells where they will be utilized. So this is a cell with a nucleus. It's like a model for a living cell, and inside this living cell will uptake through its cell membrane all these nutrients, together, of course, with vitamins and other minerals, which are absorbed without digestion. And inside the cell, there will be a process of utilization, as we said before. We have always said that these simple small molecules must reach the living cells in order to be utilized, in order for the living cells to get benefit from these simple nutrients. And now we are going to see the fate of these simple molecules, or in other words, how are these simple molecules going to be utilized by the living cells. So the next step is to understand the fate of the final products of digestion, the fate of those simple small molecules, the fate of the final products of digestion. In other words, we can say that we are going to highlight how these final products of digestion, how these final products of digestion are utilized by the living cells. How do living cells get benefit from these substances are utilized by the living cells? Okay. In order to summarize the fate of the final products of digestion, or in order to summarize how these final products are utilized by living cells, we can simply say that these simple nutrients will undergo either anabolic reactions, building up reactions, or catabolic reactions, okay? Or catabolic reactions. And this is what we are going to discuss now. And in the following screens, we are going to discuss the fate of each and every of these molecules, the fate of monosaccharides, the fate of amino acids, and the fate of fatty acids and glycerol. First of all, let's see the fate of the monosaccharides. How are they going to be metabolized? How are they going to be anabolized and catabolized in the living cell? So first of all, let's start by the monosaccharides. And on top of the monosaccharides, we have glucose, because glucose is the most abundantly ingested carbohydrate, either because you use it in disaccharide like sucrose, which contains glucose, or because you eat rice and pasta, which contain starch, and starch is finally converted into glucose. So glucose is the most abundantly utilized carbohydrate in the human body, because it is the final product of digestion of all the carbohydrates that we ingest. It is the final product of digestion of all carbohydrates. It is present in all carbohydrates, in all polysaccharides, in all disaccharides. So it is the final product of digestion of all the carbohydrates that we ingest. And that's why glucose is the most abundantly present carbohydrate in the human body. And when we talk about the fate of glucose, and this will be applied to all the other nutrient molecules, we are going to differentiate between two types of glucose loads. We have the required glucose loads, meaning that when you eat, you can eat only the amount of glucose that is required by your living cells to produce energy. But on the other hand, we have the surplus of glucose. When you eat carbohydrates abundantly, excessively, when you eat more than enough rice, more than your body needs, pasta, or candies, or whatever things that contain sugar and carbohydrates, then this is the surplus. Now, the required glucose will undergo the process of cellular respiration, and the aim of that process of cellular respiration is to produce energy. So one molecule of glucose, C6H12O6, you needn't remember the formula or memorize the formula. C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of oxygen will give rise to molecules of ATP that store energy, about 38 molecules of ATPs. And as you all know, ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the main molecule in the human body that is capable not only of storing energy, but also of releasing energy whenever this energy is needed. But unfortunately, in addition to our purpose from cellular respiration, which is getting ATP from glucose, we also obtain two molecules, carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, and 6 molecules of water. Of course, as you know, water is not a harmful product. water is beneficial in the body. For example, water is used for the purpose of hydrolyzing substances in chemical digestion. And without water, we wouldn't be able to digest the food into simple, small, soluble, absorbable molecules. But on the other hand, if you ingest a lot of water, or a lot of water more than required is produced in the body, then it is this surplus of water, the surplus of this water should be eliminated from the body. It should be removed from the body. So water is not a harmful substance, but it is considered, in this process of cellular respiration, it is considered a byproduct or a side product. And if this byproduct that is produced in parallel to energy accumulates inside the human body, then it would be toxic, and therefore the surplus of water should be excreted or removed from the body. Similarly, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide can be partly beneficial, but mostly harmful. The accumulation of carbon dioxide is harmful, and that's why carbon dioxide is considered a waste substance, and it should be eliminated from the human body. What about the surplus of glucose? The surplus of glucose will be stored in the human body. Either, firstly, it will be stored as glycogen, as you know, and glycogen, storage of glycogen occurs in the liver and occurs in the muscles. But if you still eat more than enough glucose, it will not only be glycogen stored in liver and muscles, but it would be fat that is stored under the skin, and that would result in you becoming overweight or becoming obese. So it would result in being overweight. Now, let's come back to the side items that are produced in cellular respiration and see how they are related to our lesson today. But of course, since glucose has been broken down in the presence of oxygen, then this biochemical reaction represents aerobic cellular respiration. Aerobic means that occurs in the presence of oxygen. So if cellular respiration, if the breakdown of glucose occurs in the presence of oxygen, then it is considered aerobic cellular respiration. Now, what about the carbon dioxide molecules and the water molecules that have been produced in aerobic cellular respiration? I remind you that we are discussing the fate of glucose, and when we broke down glucose in the process of cellular respiration, we obtained energy, but we also obtained two molecules that are considered byproducts of cellular respiration, which are carbon dioxide and water. We said before that carbon dioxide is mostly harmful, a small part of the carbon dioxide is beneficial to the body. It is partly beneficial because it can be recycled or reused to form bicarbonate, like for example, the sodium bicarbonate that is present in saliva. But carbon dioxide is mostly harmful, It is toxic to the body. It is the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the body would be toxic because it would make the pH of the body more and more acidic. So it is harmful because carbon dioxide can give rise to another substance that is carbonic acid, and that makes an acidic blood pH, which is unwanted, an acidic blood pH, which is unwanted. On the other hand, water is the opposite of carbon dioxide, meaning that it is mainly beneficial. It is mainly beneficial. And the most important benefit of water is that it acts as a solvent in the blood. All substances that dissolve in the plasma of blood dissolve in water, but it also is important for chemical digestion and for hydrolysis. But the surplus of water is toxic. The surplus of water is toxic, just like the surplus of carbon dioxide is toxic or harmful, and therefore we should eliminate them from the body. And this leads us to the process of excretion. Excretion. So what is excretion? Excretion is the process of elimination of or removal. When we say elimination, we mean removal, and excretion is the process of elimination or removal of the unwanted or unrequired byproducts. And when I say unwanted here, I mean the surplus that's not needed by the body. So it is the elimination or removal of the unwanted byproducts of the biochemical reactions in the body or metabolism. This is the definition of excretion. Okay. We have now to justify or to say why we need to excrete these substances, because their accumulation in the blood and therefore in the cells, their accumulation in the blood and therefore in the living cells of the human body, and therefore in the living cells of the human body is toxic to the cells. What do we mean by toxic? What do we mean by toxic? Toxic means when I say that a substance is toxic or that the accumulation of a substance is toxic, I mean that it leads to impaired cellular function. It leads to impaired, and I mean by impaired, damaged or diminished, to impaired cellular function, meaning that the cells cannot function well, and therefore this might lead to death of the human body or death of the living organism in general. And this answers the very important question, which is why we need excretion. We need excretion to avoid toxicity. We need excretion to make the cells stay or to allow the cells to continue functioning well. But we also need excretion, before saying this, in order to stabilize the internal environment of the body, so here we are dealing with, or we are explaining the importance of excretion. So the first importance or benefit we mentioned for excretion is to get rid of, or to eliminate, to get rid of poisonous substances poisonous substances. And the second purpose of excretion is to achieve homeostasis. What is homeostasis? When we say homeo, not hemo, homeostasis, we mean stability. We mean stability of the cellular environment, stability of the cellular environment. And by cellular environment, I mean that we want to stabilize everything that is inside the cell, meaning the internal cellular environment, but we also want to stabilize the environment around the cell or the external cellular environment. And I'll give you examples, but in both cases, both cases will result in the same, or will help us achieve the same purpose, which is adequate cellular function. By doing those two actions, by getting rid of poisonous material, and by achieving stability of the cellular environment, whether the internal cellular environment inside the cell or the external cellular environment around the cell, you are ensuring adequate cellular function. You are helping the cells to function properly, and therefore you are ensuring good health for the living organism. What are examples of things that by excretion, what are examples of substances that we need to stabilize inside the cell or around the cell in order to achieve homeostasis, in order to ensure adequate cellular function, and we do this by excretion. So when you excrete, for example, the surplus carbon dioxide, you are stabilizing the pH of the blood. When you excrete, for example, the surplus water, you are stabilizing the water content of the blood and all the body fluids. When you excrete the surplus salts that you eat, you are, for example, stabilizing the salt content of the blood. And among the things that we want to stabilize in the human body that are not directly related to excretion, but indirectly related to excretion, is the temperature of the human body, because you know that human beings are homeothermic animals, and homeothermic living organisms. Mammals are homeothermic living organisms, and by homeothermic we mean living organisms that are capable of keeping their core temperature or their internal temperature, constant. Now we move on to the next step, which is how are we going to excrete carbon dioxide and water? Of course, our urinary system, or the system we are going to study, or we are studying today, contains two kidneys, or includes two kidneys, and the kidneys are major organs for excretion of water. So now we're going to study how to excrete the surplus water and how to excrete the surplus carbon dioxide. So what are the excretory organs that are responsible for excretion of carbon dioxide and water? First of all, water. We have three major organs that help excretion of water. The first ones are the kidneys. The second ones are the lungs, and the third one is the skin. Of course, the kidneys excrete the surplus water in urine. So the liquid where water is excreted, or the liquid that is excreted by the kidneys, is urine, whereas the skin excretes the excess water in sweat, and the lungs excrete the excess water in exhaled air. And if you take a mirror, especially in cold weather, and put the mirror in front of your mouth and exhale in front of the mirror, when the mirror is cold, because the weather is cold, the water vapor molecules coming out of your mouth will condense on the mirror and will form water droplets. Now, it's worth mentioning here that the water content of the urine and the water content of your sweat are inversely proportionate, meaning that in summer, for example, when you sweat a lot and most of the water is excreted via sweat, then the volume of urine will diminish and the amount of water excreted via urine is diminished. And you might have noticed that in very hot weather, you don't visit the toilet frequently. On the other hand, in winter, when you do not need to sweat because you do not need to evaporate the sweat and cool down your skin temperature by this process of evaporation, minimal water is excreted by sweating because we almost do not sweat in winter. But on the other hand, all this water that is in need of being excreted has to find another way to be excreted and will be excreted via the urine, via the urinary system in urine. And that's why we all notice that in winter, the volume of urine increases. So here we have mentioned 3 excretory organs: the kidneys that belong to the urinary system, the lungs that belong to the respiratory system, and the skin, which belongs to the integumentary system. Now, on the other hand, what is the organ that is responsible for excreting the unwanted carbon dioxide in the body? Only the lungs, and mainly the lungs. So these are the 3 major excretory organs in the body. There is another organ, a 4th organ that shares in excretion, which is the liver, but actually the liver shares in excretion via another process. But if we want to discuss the direct excretory function of the liver, because there is a direct excretory and an indirect excretory function of the liver, the direct one is excretion of some broken down medication or some metabolized drugs via bile. So some metabolized drugs and some metabolized hormones. This is not, of course, related to carbon dioxide and water, but it's just worth mentioning because we have mentioned 3 excretory organs: the kidneys, the lungs, and the skin. And it is worth mentioning that we have a 4th excretory organ, which is the liver, that excretes metabolized drugs and hormones in bile. What does this mean? This means that every drug you or medicine or medication you ingest has a half-life, meaning that it starts acting in the body, doing its action in the body. For example, minimizing inflammation, minimizing or abolishing fever. But on the other hand, after a certain duration of time, which is the half-life, half of the quantity you ingested will be broken down. So the drug gradually loses its potency or its ability. And this is important in order to avoid toxicity of the drugs. Where are these inactive, metabolized, broken down drugs or hormones, because the same applies to hormones, where are they going to do? Where are they going to go? If they stay inside the human body, they will be toxic. Their accumulation would be toxic, so they should be excreted. And since this process of breaking down occurs in the liver, so the liver will excrete those metabolized drugs and hormones in bile, and they will go to the duodenum, and then to the small intestine, and then to the large intestine, where they will be lost with the feces. By having said this, we would have finished the fate of the monosaccharides, and now we're going to erase all the editing on the screen in order to see the fate of the amino acids. And why am I saying this? Again, because the problem is always with the surplus. When did we need excretion? In case of glucose, we needed excretion when we catabolized glucose in order to get energy, so we obtained byproducts, carbon dioxide and water. But here in amino acids, the waste products will not be obtained, or actually, I'm sorry, they will also be obtained through a process of breaking down. So again, we are going to divide the fate of the amino acids into the fate of the required amino acids and the fate of the surplus amino acid, meaning that, for example, if you have a protein overload, like people who go to the gym, for example, and their coaches tell them that they should eat a lot of amino acids or a lot of proteins, and this finally ends into a protein load. The fate of the required amino acids is an anabolic fate, or a building up fate, and the fate of the surplus amino acids is a catabolic fate. And this makes the confusion or the difference between amino acids and glucose. In case of glucose, we obtained the side items, carbon dioxide and water, when we broke down glucose to get energy, when we broke down the required glucose to get energy. But here, we will obtain harmful products when we break down not the required amino acids, but the excess amino acids. So this is a major difference. Now, let's start by the surplus amino acids. If you abuse or if you exaggerate and you eat a lot of proteins just because you like them or because your coach has told you to do this, so the surplus amino acids will be broken down or catabolized in the liver. So this is another important function of the liver. It will break down those amino acids, and we will get the breakdown products, 3 major breakdown products, which are urea, number 2, uric acid, number 3, ammonia, and number 4, creatinine, not creatine, creatinine. Creatine is useful, but creatinine is harmful. These are the waste products of metabolism, and they're of metabolism of what? Of metabolism of amino acids, and more accurately speaking, of catabolism of amino acids. And again, more and more accurately speaking, catabolism of the surplus amino acids or the excess amino acids, urea, uric acid, ammonia, and creatinine. All these are produced in the liver. They are produced in the liver, but they are excreted by the kidneys. So it's not the liver that excretes them. It's not the liver that excretes them. It is the kidney that excretes them. The liver only prepares them for excretion. And the kidneys excrete urea, uric acid, ammonia, and creatinine in urine. Like if the kidneys fail to do their function, we call this renal failure, or فشل كلوي. If the kidneys fail to do this, they fail to excrete these substances, both kidneys, because if only one kidney fails, the other kidney can make up. But if both kidneys fail completely to do their function and fail to excrete these substances in urine, then these substances will be accumulating in the blood. And that's why we do an important test called renal function tests. وظائف الكلى, renal function test. And renal function test is a blood test. Why a blood test? Because if you don't excrete urea, uric acid, ammonia, and creatinine, which are the harmful products of protein metabolism, if you don't excrete them in urine, then they will accumulate in the blood. And when you assess their levels in the blood, you will find that they will all be elevated in the body. You will have so how would the blood renal function test of a patient with renal failure look like? He will have an elevated urea, an elevated uric acid, an elevated ammonia, an elevated creatinine. Elevated where? Elevated in the blood. So this is the blood picture of a patient with renal failure. On the other hand, what about the required amino acids? The required amino acids will be used in anabolic processes in rebuilding proteins. Rebuilding proteins. This is a bit weird because we put a lot of effort to digest the proteins and to break them down in the digestive system to obtain amino acids. And now that the amino acids have reached the blood and reached the cells, we are talking about rebuilding of proteins again. Yes, the cells require proteins, but they had no other way to receive the proteins because proteins are complex molecules. Maybe you ate a burger, for example. So how would the burger be transmitted as it is or transported as it is to the living cell? It has to be particulated, and then it has to be further diminished until we reach the level of simple molecules to reach the cells. But now that it reached the cell does every effort to rebuild some of the protein molecules again. Why? Because these proteins might be enzymes, these proteins might be hormones, these proteins might be antibodies, for example. So if I am a pancreatic cell, I will use these amino acids to form my enzymes. If I am an endocrine cell, I will use these amino acids to form my endocrine secretion or my hormones. And if I am an immune cell, if I am a lymphocyte, for example, I would use these amino acids to form my specific protein molecules, which are antibodies. The liver in particular rebuilds a specific type of proteins, which are called plasma proteins. And these are the proteins that circulate in the plasma, and they are very important for immunity. They are very important for blood clotting. So this is the fate of the amino acid. Now, what about breaking down proteins in a similar way of breaking down carbohydrates? We have just said that proteins are being catabolized or broken down to give rise to waste products, which are urea, uric acid, ammonia, and creatinine. But what about breaking them down? Sorry. What about breaking them down the same way as we broke down glucose? Now, it's worth mentioning that the main way of breaking down proteins is that way, to break them down into urea, uric acid, ammonia, and creatinine with a very small amount of energy. In this pathway, we are not breaking them down in order to get energy, but we are breaking them down to be able to excrete them. So the liver is not breaking down the amino acids to get energy from the process of breakdown, because it's a very small amount of energy, but it's actually breaking them down to be able to get rid of them and eliminate them. But sometimes we can break down amino acids, and this is very important, to produce energy, but only if carbohydrates are not available and fats are not available. So the primary source of obtaining energy in the body is to break down glucose. When we finish all the glucose in the body, in the blood, can this happen? Yes, if you're starving for a long period of time, or fasting, or whatever, you can't find food during wars, for example, or during floods, or during any catastrophic event, then the second source will be your fat, the fat that is present in the plasma first, and then the fat that is present under the skin. And when you finish all this, you can refer to the last source, which is the amino acids. So breaking down amino acids in order to give rise to carbon dioxide and water is not a routine process in the body, but breaking down glucose to get energy is a routine process in the body. Actually, I will repeat the sentence correctly. Breaking down amino acids to obtain energy and carbon dioxide and water being produced as a side product is not a routine process in the human body. But breaking down glucose to get energy is a routine process in the body. If glucose is not available, we refer to fat. And if we finish all the fat in the plasma and all the fat under the skin, and we become skinny and we don't have any fat under the skin, we refer to amino acids to get energy, but in such a way, you will be destroying your muscles, because you will be extracting all the amino acids from your muscles to the blood, breaking them down for the sake of energy. So the body does not refer to this unless the body is present in emergency conditions. And now we come to the last fate, which is the fate of the fats. We have said that the final products of digestion of fats are, so it's fatty acids. So the final product of digestion of fats are fatty acids and glycerol. Glycerol, like glucose, is one of the sources of energy in the body. So glycerol is routinely used by the body to produce energy, usually as a part of another longer pathway of producing energy from glucose. But for fatty acids, again, we have two fates for fatty acids. I'm talking now about the fatty acids and the glycerol, which have reached the blood by the process of absorption, and whose destiny is the living cell. What happens to them in the living cell? So just like any other soluble product of digestion, it can undergo an anabolic process, a building up fate, or a catabolic fate. We have just mentioned the catabolic fate, and we said that fatty acids can be broken down in order to give energy, just like glucose, and the side products, carbon dioxide and water, are produced. But as we said before, the body does not refer to breaking down fatty acids unless all the sources of glucose are depleted. Not only glucose, but even glycogen inside the liver. So you first finish your glucose, and then you refer to your glycogen in the liver and muscles and convert them into glucose. And then when all these sources of glucose are finished or exhausted, you start breaking down or oxidizing fatty acids in the presence of oxygen. But the other phase is an anabolic phase, meaning that you take the fatty acids again and you build up big molecules of fats, and this occurs in fat cells under the skin, and this results in increased weight. So this is the fate of the fatty acids. By having said this, we would have finished the fate of the molecules. We would have understood why excretion is important to keep living organisms alive, and why accumulation of those waste products would be harmful, and why it is important to achieve homeostasis in the human body. But before ending this video, I would like to read the first 5 slides with you, just like we did in the classroom with grade 10B. So the urinary system, as you know, a system is a group of organs, and it consists of 2 kidneys, the right kidney and the left kidney, 2 ureters, and the ureter is this muscular duct that carries urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder. So it's like a transport duct for urine. And then we have the urinary bladder, which helps storage of urine until urination occurs, and urethra is that muscular, short, small duct that contracts and relaxes, either to retain urine inside the urinary bladder or to release it. And of course, all these functions will be discussed in detail on the following slides. But the kidney has to have its own blood supply. And here we can see the aorta coming from the heart. And actually, the aorta is the largest artery in the body. The aorta is the largest artery in the body, and it gives rise to 2 renal arteries. So the blood supply of the right kidney is, number 1, the renal artery, which carries oxygenated blood from the aorta and the heart to the kidney. And by oxygenated blood, we mean that it is blood rich in oxygen, poor in carbon dioxide. But on the other hand, you can see these blue colored vessels, which are the renal veins. The renal veins do the opposite. The renal veins carry deoxygenated blood away from the kidney to return it to the blood. And if I ever ask you to define deoxygenated blood, you would say the opposite. It is blood poor in oxygen, but rich in carbon dioxide. These vessels are the renal veins. So these vessels are the renal veins, and they pour their deoxygenated blood into the inferior vena cava, which will carry, by definition, this deoxygenated blood to the heart. Now, the urinary system in man, therefore, consists of 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. And the need for a urinary system, we have explained this, A body system is a group of organs, of course, that coordinate together to form one function or more than one function, but related functions. And all the organs in the urinary system, as well as all the systems in the body, will coordinate together in order to achieve one most important function, which is homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the ability of the body to keep the internal environment constant or almost constant within a very narrow range or within the limits for optimum function of the cells in order to enable the organism to survive by enabling the living cells to do their function adequately. What are examples of parameters that we need to stabilize inside the human body? We have temperature, the core temperature of the body, water concentration, ion concentration like salt, like sodium, potassium, calcium, fluoride, and the pH of the body. So the main function of an excretory system, like the urinary system, is to achieve homeostasis. What is excretion? Excretion is the elimination of the toxic, unwanted byproducts of metabolism from the body. What is metabolism? Metabolism includes all the biochemical reactions that occur in our living cells, and metabolism includes two main processes, anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism includes the reactions that build up, the building up reactions. And this means that we build up large molecules from smaller ones. Whereas catabolism includes all breaking down reactions or reactions of breaking down, in which we start by big molecules and end up by having smaller molecules. Of course, catabolism is the main process that results in unwanted byproducts or waste products whose accumulation in the body is toxic. Now, what are the functions then of the urinary system? The direct function of the urinary system is excretion or elimination, but excretion is here to serve another indirect function, which is homeostasis. And as we will be seeing on Sunday, inshallah, excretion occurs, number one, by filtration of these harmful substances from the blood through the capillaries, because the capillaries have fenestrations or openings or pores, and they will allow these unwanted substances to be filtered out of the blood. These toxic substances of catabolism can be categorized into three groups. The ones that resulted from amino acid breakdown, ammonia, urea, creatinine, uric acid, that we collectively call nitrogenous waste. Why do we collectively call them nitrogenous waste? Because they all contain the element nitrogen. And then we can also excrete not only nitrogenous waste, which are all harmful, but we can also urea has some benefits. We'll be mentioning this later on. Salts and water that exceed the body needs will also be eliminated. Why? Because we've just said that we have to keep the internal environment constant. We have to keep the salt concentration within optimum limits. We have to keep the water concentration within optimum limits. And finally, metabolized drugs and hormones, as I told you before. It's worth mentioning that one of these waste products of metabolism, which is uric acid, causes a famous disease that affects the big toe in the foot, and there is a joint here, and when uric acid crystals precipitate here, when you have excess of uric acid because you eat a lot of proteins, these crystals will cause inflammation of the big toe, which will be swollen, which will be red, which will be extremely painful, And this is a famous disease that is called gout. In Arabic, gout is nakras, and they used to call it in the past da' al-muluk or marad al-muluk, the disease of kings, because they thought that it's eating a lot of proteins that causes it. Of course, having a surplus of amino acids in the body causes it, but some people, even vegetarian, can be affected by this disease because it is sometimes gene controlled. It is sometimes an error in the metabolism that makes you form a lot of uric acid even if you don't eat a lot of proteins. Thank you so much and see you on Sunday. Concerning grade 10A, you will be receiving a homework sheet which is worksheet 1, the urinary system, that is related to the content of that video. I hope this video will be useful to you. And if you have any questions, you can just send me on the group and I'll be answering you. Thank you and see you on Sunday.